You know the story already. Someone reaches the title, the salary, the corner office everyone said would make them happy, and then they walk away from all of it. Maybe it's someone from your own life. Maybe it's a version of yourself you've thought about becoming late at night and then talk yourself out of by morning. No breakdown, no dramatic exit, just a quiet decision to stop climbing. Everyone around them waits for the regret to show up. 6 months pass. A year passes. It never does. Psychologists have spent decades studying exactly why some people can leave the race entirely and never once turn back. And the explanation has almost nothing to do with money, and everything to do with how the mind quietly changes its own definition of enough. Here are 14 patterns researchers keep finding in the people who make that exit stick. Trait 1. They stop adapting to more. Psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell described a phenomenon in the early 1970s known as the hedonic treadmill. Every raise, promotion, or upgrade you chase gives you a short burst of satisfaction before your baseline expectation quietly rises to match it, so the finish line keeps moving the moment you reach it. People who exit the rat race notice this pattern and break it deliberately. They lower the treadmill speed instead of trying to outrun it, so satisfaction stops requiring constant acceleration, and stillness stops feeling like falling behind. Trait 2. Their motivation was never actually external in the first place. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, working out of the University of Rochester, developed self-determination theory, showing that lasting motivation depends on 3 things: autonomy, competence, and genuine connection to other people. Titles and bonuses can't reliably supply any of those 3 ingredients on their own. When someone finally notices that an entire career was built on external reward rather than any of these, walking away stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like a long overdue correction. Trait 3. They read the research on money differently than most people do. Psychologist Tim Kasser, at Knox College, spent his career studying people who rank wealth and status as their top life goals. His findings, replicated repeatedly across different populations, are strikingly consistent. Higher materialistic ranking predicts lower measured well-being, not higher, and the gap tends to widen the longer that ranking is held. People who quit the race have usually absorbed this exact lesson directly through lived experience, long before they ever encountered research confirming what they already suspected. Trait 4. They separate hygiene from happiness. Frederick Herzberg's 2-factor theory of motivation draws a sharp line between hygiene factors, things like salary, job title, and security, and true motivators, things like meaning, growth, and purpose. Hygiene factors can only prevent dissatisfaction. They cannot manufacture genuine fulfillment on their own, no matter how large the number attached to them grows. People who leave high-paying, high-status roles have usually figured out that no amount of hygiene was ever going to manufacture the motivator they actually needed all along. Trait 5. They let the sunk cost go instead of protecting it. Psychologist Leon Festinger's work on cognitive dissonance explains why people stay in situations that clearly aren't working for them anymore. Admitting that years were spent chasing the wrong goal creates real psychological discomfort. So most people avoid that admission entirely and simply keep going, adding more years to the pile rather than facing what it cost them. People who exit tolerate that discomfort head-on instead of running from it, which is precisely what finally lets them stop. Trait 6. They rebuild identity outside the job title before they ever leave it. Sociologist Helen Rose Fuchs-Eboff studied what she called role exit, the gradual process of disengaging from an identity that once defined someone almost completely. Her research found that successful exits require constructing a new identity before the old one fully disappears from view. People who leave the race and genuinely stay gone almost always did this quiet reconstruction first, long before they ever handed in a resignation letter to anyone. Trait 7. They change what they measure themselves against. Leon Festinger's earlier work on social comparison theory shows that satisfaction depends heavily on the reference group a person chooses to measure against day to day. Inside the race, that reference group is almost always people standing one rung higher on the same ladder. Once someone exits, the comparison group shifts entirely, usually toward their own past self instead, and that single shift removes most of the pressure that made the race feel endless and unwinnable in the first place. Trait 8. They trade money for time on purpose, not by accident. Behavioral scientist Ashley Willens, at Harvard Business School, has published research showing that people who deliberately prioritize time over money consistently report higher life satisfaction, even at meaningfully lower income levels than before. People who leave demanding careers are frequently making this exact trade with open eyes, consciously choosing time affluence over whatever the next raise or promotion might have offered them instead. Trait 9. They stop needing an audience to validate the effort. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow found that the most satisfying human experiences come from complete absorption in a task for its own sake, not from any external recognition attached to the outcome. People who quit the race often describe discovering this kind of absorption in something nobody around them is applauding, and finding it more satisfying than any title, promotion, or performance review ever managed to be. Trait 10. They stop treating every option as a possible mistake. Psychologist Barry Schwartz's research on the paradox of choice found that an overwhelming number of options doesn't produce better decisions. It produces anxiety, second-guessing, and a persistent fear of the road not taken. Inside the race, every decision carries the weight of dozens of alternative paths left unexplored. Once someone exits, the options narrow on purpose, and that narrowing, counterintuitively, is what finally makes daily decisions feel light again instead of exhausting. Trait 11. Their priorities shift once basic security stops being the goal. Political scientist Ronald Inglett's decades of research through the World Values Survey identified something he called the post-materialist shift. Once a person's fundamental security and survival needs are reliably met, their priorities tend to move away from further accumulation and toward autonomy, self-expression, and personal meaning instead. People who quit the race have usually crossed that exact threshold quietly, sometimes years before they consciously act on it. Trait 12. They stop postponing the life that was supposed to come later. Psychologist Abraham Maslow's research on self-actualization described a small group of people who reach a state where growth, purpose, and what he called peak experiences finally take priority over safety and esteem. Maslow noted that most people never get there because the climb towards safety and esteem never actually ends on its own. People who exit the race are often the ones who simply decided the climb was over, whether or not anyone agreed with the timing. Trait 13. They recognize the cycle that was actually keeping them stuck. Economist Juliette Score, in her research on what she called the work and spend cycle, found that rising income tends to produce rising consumption, which then quietly demands even more income just to sustain itself. The two feed each other indefinitely unless someone deliberately interrupts the loop. People who exit the race are usually the ones who finally noticed this cycle running in the background of their own life and chose to interrupt it on purpose. Trait 14. They start measuring their life by what they'll leave behind instead of what they'll line next. Psychologist Erik Erikson's stage theory of development identified a period he called generativity versus stagnation, where adults shift from proving themselves to contributing something that outlasts them. Erikson found that people who skip this shift often report a quiet sense of stagnation later, regardless of how much status they accumulated along the way. People who quit the race tend to reach this realization earlier than the timeline Erikson originally mapped out. None of this means ambition disappears once someone steps off the track. It means ambition stops being borrowed from someone else's scoreboard and starts being measured on entirely different terms instead. The people who leave and never look back aren't running away from effort itself. They are running toward a version of effort that finally answers to them instead of to a system built to keep them permanently one step short of enough. That was never an escape. That was always a redefinition of what winning was supposed to mean in the first place. You don't need a dramatic resignation letter or one-way ticket somewhere to start recognizing these patterns in your own life. Most people who eventually quit the race describe the shift as gradual, a series of small, private realizations long before anyone else noticed anything had changed at all. The treadmill slows down quietly, not because a person gave up, but because they finally stopped confusing motion with progress. If any of these 14 traits described someone you know, or described you, that's worth sitting with for a moment before you scroll to the next thing. Some patterns are worth noticing before life decides to point them out for you.